presidency of Franklin D. Roosevelt marked many changes in how the executive office operated and how it would continue to operate in the future. His very unique presidency had the largest impact on American society, politics, and economics than any one presidency in the 20th century and since. In order to facilitate these changes, Roosevelt capitalized on the technology of radio to reach the American people and frequently regarded them during his fireside chats, which established a tradition of the American presidency as having a bond with and being a champion of the people. In 1920, during his campaign for the vice presidential nomination under James M. Cox, Roosevelt developed a personal relationship to the people who turned up on the trail. The younger Roosevelt's charming and charismatic persona made it easy for the public to latch onto his ideas. In turn, FDR learned that the public could be a powerful tool and ally if one could gain their trust and respect.
These were stirring hours in the life of our president, where he was getting his first lessons in the art of national campaigning. He loved the gay clamor of the political battle as he loves it now. He responded to every stirring phase of the exciting, moving panorama of political life. These marching people were not merely voters to Franklin Roosevelt, they were human beings.
We can see this sentiment echoed in his very first fireside chat on the subject of the banking crisis.
I want to talk for a few minutes with the people of the United States about banking. To talk with the comparatively few who understand the mechanics of banking, but more particularly with the overwhelming majority of you who use banks for the making of deposits and the drawing of checks. I want to tell you what has been done in the last few days and why it was done and what the next steps are going to be. I recognize that the many proclamations from state capitals and from Washington, the legislation, the Treasury regulations and so forth, couched for the most part in banking and legal terms, ought to be explained for the benefit of the average citizen.
It was important for Roosevelt to calm the citizens who had been affected by the crisis and to be as transparent with them as possible. Noticeably, he does not speak down to them or regard them as lesser. Rather, he is making himself vulnerable in order to gain their sympathy. Roosevelt's humble and honest nature quickly fostered a relationship with the public that would eventually allow for him to take an even more ambitious move toward restabilizing the nation. Even though the radio had been utilized by presidents before FDR, never before had they been utilized in the way he did. To contrast the dry and sophisticated delivery of most presidential speeches, quote, President Roosevelt, by contrast, let his voice rise and fall naturally as he spoke on air. Even though each of his talks were fact-checked and rewritten 6 or more times by a team of secretaries, speechwriters, and press specialists, his delivery still made them sound fresh. By 1933, after having begun his habit of fireside chats only earlier that year, Roosevelt was already receiving mail praising him for his broadcasts. Quote, I can't resist the temptation to add my admiration and enthusiasm for your address broadcast over the radio last night. I will vote and work for any party that has at its head a man of your ability and sincerity as a leader. End quote. Roosevelt received letters from a wide array of people, all from drastically different backgrounds and classes, who were eager to relate to a leader during a domestic disaster such as the Great Depression. It was important for FDR to maintain his position as a leader for all Americans, especially during the Great Depression, as he required the support of the people as he transitioned the role of the president as having an active hand in drafting legislation, not just ratifying it. Because his progressive reforms, such as the agricultural reforms for example, were so ambitious and involved the government becoming heavily involved in the commerce of farming, he had to establish an honest and intimate relationship with the people to convince them he had their best interests at heart and that his plans would benefit the citizens first. FDR began his address by alluding to his first fireside chat.
In that way, I tried to make clear to the country various facts that might otherwise have been misunderstood, and in general to provide a means of understanding, which I believe did much to restore confidence. Tonight, 8 weeks later, I come for the second time to give you my report, in the same spirit and by the same means, to tell you about what we have been doing and what we are planning to do.
Roosevelt reminds his audience of the honesty he was praised for in the past, and similarly speaks to them as equals without concealing any happenings behind closed doors. During the onset of World War II, FDR had to reassure the American people that their position of supporting our European allies was essential to preserving American freedom. FDR knew that war in Europe was inevitable upon Germany's invasion of Poland, and, several days before his fireside address on the topic of war, he issued a Labor Day statement which reminded the people of the achievements that they had made and the hardships that they had overcome during the decade of the 30s. Upon Labor Day, American wage earners may well consider the benefits and satisfaction which flow from a democracy not only to them, but to all our people. We have made great economic and social advances in the public interest since March 1933. End quote. Roosevelt reminded the public not just of their success in combating the Depression, but he also reminded them of the virtues of democracy, which would be important in convincing them to assist in defending democracy abroad. When FDR actually addresses the war weeks later, he continues this trend of utilizing the reputation he has built up as being honest to bring credibility to other facets of government, including their past involvement in other wars.
It is right that I should recall to your minds the consistent and at times successful efforts of your government in these crises to throw the full weight of the United States into the cause of peace.
Using the faith of the citizens and their newfound pride in American democracy, he was able to steer the country through the treacherous international crises that would eventually see the Allies victors in the war, and America stepping up as the custodian of freedom worldwide. The role of the president as a public figure did not start with FDR, but his fireside chats popularized this concept and laid the groundwork for his successors to take advantage of similar advancements, such as television or social media. With the founding of the United Nations and the role of America as a world leader, the president would now have to not only comfort the citizens of the United States on affairs, but now the country's peers on the world stage. FDR was a trailblazer for many reasons, but perhaps his most important lesson to the legacy of the presidency was to be a servant of the people and regarding them as though they were equals.